Muy buenas noches y bienvenidos a esta última sesión del primer día del Expansión Summit 2022. A lo largo del día hemos tocado diferentes temas de gran relevancia y tenemos ahora un cierre bastante importante con uno de los principales futurólogos, una de las mentes más reconocidas acerca de ese tema, William Halal. Él es profesor emérito de la Universidad George Washington en Washington, D.C. Ha sido además asesor de gobiernos, de empresas, y tiene además un libro reciente llamado Beyond Knowledge. William Halal ha sido reconocido también como una mente bastante disruptiva y con quien tendremos ahora el placer de tener una conversación para poder finalizar esta primera jornada. Thank you very much, William, for being here with us at Expansión Summit 2022. It is a pleasure. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this session and to have you in this event.
Thank you, Gonzalo. It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
I'm going to call you Bill. I hope it's that okay with you.
Yes, please, Bill.
Thank you. Now, I believe you have a presentation for us, so we're going to start with that presentation. It's going to last a few minutes, and afterwards, we're going to continue with a Q&A session. Todos nuestros invitados, a toda nuestra audiencia, pueden mandar las preguntas a cualquiera de nuestras redes sociales para compartirlas también aquí con Bill. Go ahead, Bill. You have the floor, and we'll be back with you in a few minutes.
So I want this talk to be useful to Mexicans. I think there's a great opportunity at this point to redefine the way we do business. And it would be good for everybody. It'd be good for the managers of corporations. It could be good for employees, customers, the public, everybody. It could be good for Mexico. It could be a wonderful godsend for Mexico. So that's the spirit in which I want to present my remarks. Well, I'm going to talk about two things. The main thing I'm going to tell you about is my work in what I call the democratic enterprise. This is happening right now. It's being called various things like stakeholder capitalism, conscious capitalism, ESG, those kinds of words. But I think it's, as I'm going to show you, it's more accurate to think of it as a socio-economic system, an entire socio-economic system that can be more accurately described as democratic enterprise. If you choose to use those terms, but Mexicans can use whatever terms they want. And this is, I think, a powerful development. It's historic. It's the first time that corporations, at least in the United States, and I think in other parts of the world too, are moving beyond the bottom line, beyond the profit motive, and starting to include the interests of their employees, their customers, their suppliers, distributors, the public, in the goals of the business. And this, I think, is going to be, it could be a godsend. It could be good for business. It could be a better way to make more money. In fact, it could be a competitive advantage. So I don't see this as giving up the profit motive. And then I want to show the big picture here behind this, because this is really a historic development. And the change in business is simply, I think, a part of the change in consciousness that we need for addressing the enormous crises that the world is caught in the midst of. We can't continue running the world the way we have now, as I'm going to show you. And we're being driven into a new era, an age of consciousness right now. We are living beyond knowledge now. That's the title of my new book, Beyond Knowledge. We are living beyond knowledge now because the major decisions are being made not on the basis of knowledge, but upon emotions, values, beliefs, and other subjective values. So we're living beyond knowledge now, and we need to develop a global consciousness to get through these crises. And the corporation could lead the way out of this mess by developing this democratic form of enterprise, which would be a shift in economic consciousness, part of a global consciousness. So that's what we're going to talk about. Here's the history of where we've been. The profit center model is what everybody is familiar with. In fact, if you stop average people on the street and ask them what is the purpose of business, they'll tell you to make money. So this is what everybody understands. 50 years ago, the social responsibility model was introduced, but it didn't have much success. Many corporations have done this fairly well, but it didn't take over because it focused on responsibility. And nobody wants to take on more responsibility unless there's some benefit to it. It was seen as philanthropic, that doing good. And the corporation has to compete in a market economy. So it has to do more than do good. It has to create value. It has to be competitive. And that's what introduces the new model that I call the collaborative enterprise or the democratic enterprise. This resolves the problems with the profit center model and social responsibility model because it includes all stakeholders as partners in the firm. That's why the arrows point in two directions, so that the corporate management now is in the position of integrating the resources, the knowledge, the support of all of the stakeholders into a more productive whole. So it creates social value as well as economic value. And so everybody benefits, including, including the management of the firm, the corporation itself. The corporation becomes more competitive because it's using the resources of its stakeholders in a productive way to solve strategic problems and create value. And it does this, I'm going to show you, I think, with less risk as well. So this is an overview of where I think we've been historically in terms of the role of the corporation. And I'm going to show you now why I think the corporate enterprise model is happening now and why it's more effective. Now, this is some work I did many years ago. I won the Mitchell Prize for this many years ago, which included a $10,000 award. And at that time, $10,000 was a lot of money. It was worth about $40,000 or $50,000 today. And what I did is I took the model that we use for investors. We know about that. They invest their capital in the firm. Those are the resources they invest. They get benefits, dividends, and capital gains, and they could suffer losses. And I took that same model and I extended it to all the other stakeholders. So, and I found that, yes, there were resources for every stakeholder, there were benefits for every stakeholder, and there were costs for every stakeholder. So there really isn't much difference. So this is a nice model. It shows that the corporation is basically a socio-economic system. It's silly to think of it as simply something that makes money, because it's intrinsically involved with the role of employees, customers, the public, and associated firms. It makes no sense to talk about emphasizing profit alone, because that suboptimizes the performance of the entire system, because they're all roughly the same. So then we moved on from this, defining the model, to actually creating a simulation to produce some results. And we did this a few hundred times, this simulation, using a business game, just to get some numbers to see if this was feasible. And we got these numbers here. I'm not going to defend the precise numbers because that's really not important. What is important is to show that this makes sense, that it makes sense to think of the corporation as a socio-economic system, because all of these people, the employees, the customers, the public, they all invest resources and they all gain benefits and they all suffer costs, just like the way investors do. And so this is, I think, a powerful perspective, a different way to look at the corporation as a socio-economic system. Employees invest their training, their education, and that sort of thing, and so forth. And customers invent the money they spend on a product and so forth. I don't want to go into the details because that's not really important, but it is important just to see that it's accurate to describe the corporation as a socio-economic system. Now, what are the implications of that? I think the implications are profound. Let's go through the conclusions that we can draw from this data. First of all, as I've said, there is no essential difference between investors and the other stakeholders. All stakeholders invest resources, they incur costs and expenses, and just the way investors do. So there really isn't any difference. It's simply a political choice. Some corporations are employee-owned, some are customer-owned. So a corporation is a system that can be managed to serve different purposes. I think it's best to serve all of the purposes because right now we are sub-optimizing very seriously. By focusing on the money only, we are ignoring all of the social resources and costs and benefits of the corporation, which are greater than the financial side of the ledger by, I think, an order of magnitude, by a factor of maybe 5 or 10. So by focusing on money alone, we're seriously sub-optimizing the performance of the corporation as a socio-economic system. And then to do this well, to improve the performance of the entire system, we need some social measures so that we can tell how well we're performing vis-a-vis employees, customers, and so forth, just the way we do for investors. So we need some social measurements, some social accounting, which is easily done. That's easily done. And then we want to emphasize the point that this is different than the old model of social responsibility. This is a model that is productive. That's why I think it could take off. That's why it is taking off. I notice the biggest consulting firm in the world, McKinsey, now stresses ESG. They think it's a good model for the time being, but I think this should go beyond ESG and beyond stakeholder capitalism because it'd be more productive. If we see the possibilities here, it means that by actively engaging stakeholders in solving strategic problems, the company can become more competitive. It can create more value for everybody. That's the key. That's what's different than social responsibility. The collaborative enterprise requires managers to work with their stakeholders in a strategic fashion to solve problems, strategic problems. For instance, a simple example, if you can engage your employees actively in working to make the firm more productive by getting them to actually feel that they own the company, that they have some stake in the company by, say, giving them stock or profit sharing or something. If you can do this well so that they feel as though they're owners of the company, you will get a huge increase in performance. And we need to do that with all of the stakeholders, with customers as well, because only customers know what they really want and what they need. And so if you work with customers, you can serve their needs better and get a loyal base of patronage, which would make for a huge increase in corporate performance. And that's true of all of these stakeholders, suppliers and distributors and the public as well. And then I want to go to the social implications of this. If this were done well, the corporation could become a self-regulating system because it would include all of the major parties that it influences in its operations, so that you wouldn't need government to have regulations for employee relations and regulations for the way customers are treated. You could probably eliminate a lot of those regulations if the corporation really works with its stakeholders effectively, because it would be a fairly self-regulating system. And that would just change the entire nature of an entire economic system. The corporation would be setting an example for collaboration. It will show that cooperation is productive, that it's effective. And so the nation as a whole would probably become more collaborative and more productive. Without the need for big increases in government, you could probably reduce some government functions. I think this could change the the way business people are treated. Right now, business people are treated as though they're greedy, selfish, and only concerned for themselves. It's a terrible reputation that's been inherited for 100 years of focusing on money alone, with some terrible treatment along the way. If we could really do this, business people could become the heroes, the servant leaders who bring together all of the stakeholders and help them work together to make the entire corporation more productive, and everybody benefits, including the investors. And I think this could be done with less risk, because the very sources of uncertainty in the business environment, employees and customers and governments, would be part of the system. You would collaborate with them so that they would not surprise you with unexpected crises. So I think we could make more money with less risk, possibly, if this were done well. Now, here's a good example of a company that did this, Bondville Power. It's a utility in the Northwest United States. And I love the way they describe it here. Before they engaged their stakeholders, they viewed outsiders as a nuisance. They were a problem. The employees, the unions, the governments were just a problem that they had to struggle with. After they engaged with them, they started working with them. It took a while. It took a few months of meetings. But after they did that, here's what they learned. Our adversaries helped us find creative solutions to intractable problems. Public involvement is a must for today's managers. Conflict is unavoidable. The only choice is whether to dodge it or to harness it. There are these different interests in a business firm as a socioeconomic system. That's true. But so the responsibility of managers today, I think, is to integrate all those interests into a more productive whole. That is a great challenge. It's very difficult, but I think it'd be a new era in business. Now, here's my last slide on the democratic enterprise. And I just want to leave you with some examples of this to show what other companies have done. I knew Skip LaFoe, the former president of General Motors Saturn division, and he was a different kind of executive. He was inspirational. He would organize meetings with labor leaders, with their advertising companies, with consumer advocates, government officials, and he would listen. He would listen to their views, and he made it clear that this was their company, not his company. It was their company, and they all pitched in. This was wonderful. Somebody who wanted to hear what they thought and what they had to say. And so they took this seriously after a while, and they made it their company. Everybody worked together to make it a more productive company. And it was. GM Saturn was a marvelous company while it lasted. It went out of business for reasons I don't understand. I think it was because it was seen as a foreign body in the General Motors Corporation as a whole, because it was different than the rest of the divisions. Johnson & Johnson has always done this. They've always been concerned about their customers, the physicians, their employees, all of the stakeholders, and they do a good job of looking after their concerns. And there's a whole bunch of companies who have done this. I want to call your attention to one particular company. The Mondragon corporation in Spain has about 100 small units within it. Each one is a separate company, a separate enterprise. They're all run by the employees. A roaring success. They earn as much as, I think, $10 billion a year. They have 80,000 employees, I believe. So that's a good model, I think, for Mexico to think about. Now, let's move now to the bigger implications for history. This is out of my book, Beyond Knowledge. And this is a work that I did a few years ago on social evolution, which I think is very revealing. It tells us where we are today in history and where we're going. I don't think you can understand the situation today unless you see it in terms of social evolution. This charts the rise of civilization from the very beginnings all the way to the present period today. And you can see at the bottom scale is a logarithmic scale. You couldn't see this on an ordinary scale because you wouldn't see anything. The curve would be flat and would just make a sharp right angle up. But on a logarithmic scale, it stretches out the period of today so that you can see the curve. And the vertical scale is simply the various stages of evolution from the agrarian stage to the industrial service age, knowledge age, and today, an age of consciousness. Let me go through a few of these points here to make this clear. But before I do that, let me make an interesting point here. It's interesting that all of these data points are historic. They're well known. They're empirically based, and you could find them in various references. And the interesting thing is that when I plotted this the first time, I was amazed that they form a perfect S-curve. Ordinarily, when you plot data, there's always scatter, but there's no scatter here. It fits perfectly. It's a perfect S-curve. And an S-curve is the characteristic growth pattern for every form of life, from a culture of bacteria to a human being, and here to civilization. The post-industrial revolution here occurred about 1950, and I remember that I was starting my education at the University of California at Berkeley, a little after that, and I was impressed by the book by Daniel Bell, Coming of Post-Industrial Society, and I was fascinated with that. I thought, post-industrial, what follows industrial? So that caught my attention. I've been studying this ever since. And that's when we moved from the industrial age, factories, to services. Automation was automating factory work. People were terrified of unemployment, but it never happened. Employment kept robust, and we entered a service age of large organizations where most employees are managers or supervisors or employees working in white-collar work. And then the knowledge age occurred about the year 2000, and I forecast that about 1980 or so, no later than 1990. I could see this was coming. And I would tell people that I think we're going to see personal computers and a knowledge age. And they thought that was silly. Why would you need, what would you do with a personal computer? It seemed incomprehensible. People could not imagine having personal computers. And now here we are today with 2 personal computers per individual in terms of their laptops and their smartphones and their other devices. So we're here, it happened. And something like that is happening right now with the move to an age of consciousness. I think market is happening 2020. It started about 10 years before that, when we started seeing crazy comments appearing in the political sphere. And then when Donald Trump took over the presidency, it was clear that this was different. And it was driven by the social media, of course. I'm going to say more about that in a minute. But that's been a different era. People are no longer concerned with knowledge because it's taken for granted, and they focus instead on emotions, values, and beliefs. And that's why we've seen all of this crazy talk on both sides of the political spectrum. And I think this culminated in the year 2020, because that's when we saw the insurrection on the Capitol of the United States. That was historic. That, I think, was so unusual that it marks the beginning of an age of consciousness. So we're entering an age of consciousness right now, I think, and I think we're likely to see a mental spiritual revolution to solve these enormous problems that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. We're entering an age of consciousness, which means maturity. I think it means that we address the problems of our time in a responsible way to create a mature civilization that can be sustainable. Let me move on, and I have just 2 more slides, and then we're going to take some questions. Now, here's what's driving the age of consciousness, I think. This is a model of the structure of consciousness that we did based on reviewing the literature. And this is well known, especially the difference between objective and subjective forms of consciousness. That's very important. That's well accepted in the scientific literature. The objective functions are the things that computers are good at, being aware of the environment, taking data from the environment, memory, learning, knowledge, and making decisions. That's what computers are good at. And that's what computers are automating now. And as that is automated, attention is being driven up the hierarchy into the subjective realm. And that's why we're seeing this focus on emotions, purpose, values, beliefs, imagination, all of that sort of thing. So we're being forced by the technology revolution, by the digital revolution, into higher consciousness right now. It's happening now. It's confusing. It's not a very good consciousness. We have to learn how to manage our consciousness better, but we're entering, I think, the mature stage of civilization at this time. And here's what I call the crisis of global maturity. All of these threats that block further progress. Mike, Mary, and I did a study a few years ago, and we found that of the sample that we surveyed, 60 to 70% thought there was a probability of disaster from all of these threats: climate, pandemics, financial collapse, inequality, conflict, and so forth. So that data was very sobering. The majority of people think that we're either going to see disaster or major collapse. And then the COVID pandemic made it clear that the system doesn't work very well. And then I noticed the New York Times had results of a survey that showed 50% of people think humanity is doomed. Now, that's an extreme point of view, but that shows how serious this is. And then a UN report on the work of the International Climate Change Project reported that they think total societal collapse is likely unless drastic steps are taken soon. So these are all signs of the threat that the world is facing. These are existential threats. We're not going to muddle through them the way we have before. And I think they require a shift to what I call global consciousness. In fact, I had an article in the Además magazine, your military magazine, Además, about global consciousness. We need people to stop thinking about the old values of profit, self-interest, and power. Instead, start thinking about the interconnections between all of us. The fact that this is one world, one planet, and we have to coexist on it, and we have to learn how to cooperate to do that better. And that's where the corporation offers this enormous possible leadership by showing a way to do that. Now, the bottom line, I think, is that this means social institutions all have to change, and they are changing, but slowly. We talked about the corporation, the Business Roundtable decision that made the interests of all stakeholders important for the corporation now, the need for collaborative or democratic enterprise. Government has to change. It has to become less bureaucratic, more entrepreneurial, and so forth. All of these institutions have to change. So that's in a nutshell where I think we are today. It's a very difficult period. There's no doubt about that. It looks terrible. It looks very, very disturbing, the threats that are out there. But that's always true of crisis. Crisis always looks like that. But crisis can be solved. And we have the responsibility as human beings to shape our consciousness, which then will allow us to solve these enormous problems and to achieve a global maturity. And corporations, I think, could lead in this heroic challenge, because they could show the way. They could show the way by showing how it's profitable, it's productive to cooperate. And Mexicans, I think, have a great opportunity because you have enormous resources in Mexico, resources for renewable energy, labor force, and I think you have a history of doing things of this type. So if Mexico and Mexican business people could find the resources, the leadership to move in this direction, it'd be wonderful for Mexico. That's where I want to stop at this point and take some questions from Gonzalo. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Bill. I think that was extremely interesting. Now going to the questions. The first one would be, where are we standing right now in terms of this transformation, especially here in Mexico? Where do you see us in this country, going forward to that stage beyond knowledge that you were talking about?
Well, I can't speak for Mexico. I don't know the state of your culture that well, but I'll speak in terms of the world as a whole. I think it's very clear to me that we know that I think it's clear that we're entering an age of consciousness. I think that's clear because we can see the results of social media, the automation of knowledge, and the movement up the hierarchy of consciousness from objective factors to subjective factors. So I think that's pretty clear. What we don't know is the possibility of seeing a mental spiritual revolution to a global consciousness. That's the big question. We've done some studies of that at TechCast, my company, using our method of collective intelligence. And we estimate that this is likely to happen about 2030, plus or minus about 5 years. I think that's a good forecast, 2030. It could happen in a variety of ways. In fact, there's something is happening right now in the United States that could change global opinion. The Department of Justice is finally starting to investigate the Trump administration. And we at TechCast, we did a study of this. We estimate that there's about a 55% probability that Trump and his associates will be indicted for the January 6th insurrection and for what's happening right now with these secret files. And if that should happen, I think that could be a political turning point in the United States. That could end this growth of autocracy. Autocracy is growing around the world, mainly because it's a reaction to the disturbing forces of change. I mean, change is so rapid and so dramatic that people are frightened. And so they're looking for solutions from strong leaders. But that's not going to solve very much, I don't think. And if this happens in the United States, if the Trump era collapses, I think it's likely to happen before in a year or two. That could change opinion around the world. It could shift the attention towards democracy, and then I think it'd be the whole issue of addressing the crisis of global maturity could then be addressed. That could become a reality, and I think we could see a shift towards global consciousness about 2030. I think that's our best forecast.
You're talking about society, that is going to have more consciousness. Now, people might find actually that very odd, that you think that we're going in that direction. I mean, how can you say that and sustain that when a lot of people might think that we're indeed going in the opposite way? We're facing wars, companies are facing or are taking decisions that might not be that conscious. So people might find that very confusing. So how can you sustain what you're saying?
Yes, I know. I hear that a lot. Whenever I give talks about maybe 20 or 30% of the audience has a hard time believing it. They've seen so many terrible things happen for the last few decades that they just can't believe anything good will happen. And in fact, the changes in business practices are often dismissed as greenwashing. That's the term that's used, the ESG movement. I think corporations are serious about it. I read the correspondence between executives and the media, and I think business executives are serious for one good reason. They know that they have to. They know that the problems are so severe that nobody else is going to solve them. And so they have to do it themselves. Business executives, good business executives, know that they have to get out there and start solving these problems by bringing them into the governance of their corporations, because nobody else is going to do it. So that's really the situation that we face as a world as a whole. Yeah, there are terrible things happening, like the invasion of Ukraine. Those things just remind us of the problems, the things we don't want to do. Putin just showed us the limits of autocracy, how terrible autocracy is, and the terrible costs of wars of aggression. It's reminded the whole world that we can't indulge wars of aggression. So these are this is the middle of the crisis. We are in the stage of a crisis now, and if social evolution plays out the way it normally does, we're looking at this model of social evolution that I showed you, and it's a very precise model. It's moving towards a conclusion, towards maturity, consciousness. If that plays out the way it should, I think our forecast of 2030 is pretty reasonable. I think that's likely to happen, in spite of all of the terrible things that are going on. There's no really good solution to that problem. We need to have, if you want to have hope in the future, you have to have faith in something. And I'm suggesting the thing to have faith in is social evolution and the knowledge that we're moving into an age of consciousness now. If you can have faith in that, and faith in humanity, in humanity's ability to respond, then I think we can find a source of hope.
So, Bill, what factors could disrupt your prediction? I mean, what events might actually take us in a different direction to where you are telling us that we're going to?
Yeah, well, another war of aggression, other wars of aggression would be terrible. If China launched a war on trying to take over Taiwan, for instance, that could be terrible. The climate crisis is getting very severe now, very severe, and it's starting to hurt. If we don't move quickly enough to do something about climate, that could end everything. We could see a major shift in the climate, a catastrophic shift, not just gradual, but a major shift. So you're right, there are terrible things that could happen that could throw these forecasts off. If it follows the normal path of social evolution, then I think we're probably going to be okay. So it comes down to having faith in social evolution, the forces of history, and in humanity's ability to respond to them. And we have to start responding. We have to start acting. We have to start thinking in terms of global consciousness. That's the big challenge right now, because these problems are not going to be solved thinking in terms of profit and money and self-interest and power. They're going to be solved by a different mentality, a global consciousness.
Well, Bill, we have a question from the audience, which I find very interesting. How can companies begin their path to be more conscious? I mean, we listen to them talk about how they are adopting a better governance and how they are making better and more conscious decisions. But in order to really get, to get companies and people, past just from an idea to an actual application of this, what's the path of it? I mean, what's the way to actually achieving this in reality?
I think one of the best things to do is start listening to one another. In fact, let me remind you of the example I showed of Bondville Power, the company that started listening to the outsiders. And then they realized that it was a great advantage. That shows the power of listening. We have to stop shouting at one another, arguing. There's no point to arguing. Arguing doesn't accomplish anything. My newsletter, which goes out every week, is now studying what we call talking across differences. The differences between us are growing dramatically because of social media. And the only way we're going to make sense out of this and move forward is if we start listening to one another. And that means when you speak, you avoid inflammatory language. You don't say terrible things about the other person. You speak from the heart about what you really feel, about what bothers you. And the person who's listening doesn't argue back. He doesn't say you're wrong or I don't believe that. He listens carefully. And then if you respond constructively. You ask questions. And so I think CEOs should start doing this with their stakeholders, with their employees groups, their customers, their suppliers, distributors, their governments. Start listening to them. And it may take some time, but I think you could change the entire attitude.
Now, Bill, both democracy and institutions require trust in order for them to function correctly. However, when we see data about the public trust in both democracy and traditional institutions, including the media, for example, we see that we're losing it. So what's your take on this?
That's the way a crisis always feels. A crisis feels like it's the end, but it's not. We have to not panic and start thinking about the other side of the crisis, how we're going to get through it. And if you could remember that this collaborative enterprise, this democratic enterprise, is not simply doing good. It's a more productive form of corporation. It's a way to solve problems, social problems, while making more money at less risk. That's the thing to keep in mind. This is not the old social responsibility. This is different. This is strategic problem solving.
The title of this conference, Bill, is actually The Future of Capitalism. Where are we going in terms of this idea? However, in your opinion, in your mind, does capitalism actually has a future?
Well, capitalism is a funny word. It's a loaded term. It means so many different things to different people. We often say capitalism when we mean markets. I mean, that's not going to change. We're always going to have a market economy, decentralized free markets. This doesn't change that. It just means that the corporation, the player in the market operates as a cooperative whole. So it's more competitive because it's able to cooperate among its stakeholders. So there's no conflict with the principles of free markets. This really takes the concept of free enterprise to, I think, its logical conclusion, to the place where I think it should end up, where we don't focus on money, but we focus on human needs, including the needs of investors. Doesn't change that. It doesn't say profit's bad. I think investors could make more money, as I keep saying, with less risk. So everybody could benefit because if we cooperate, that's the key. This is not the old social responsibility. This is the cooperation, collaborative problem solving to create value. That's what we have to keep in mind.
You know, I think a lot of people that are optimists, that think they are actually a minority and that they share values with everything that we've discussed here, might actually find this conference and this talk very uplifting. But I mean, how can people actually, that do conceive the world this way, I mean, how can they continue in this path? How can they, inside their countries, inside their society, just continue, thinking this way and actually believing that we are going in that direction?
Well, one thing to remember or to understand, I think, is that these ideas are really, they're not really new. They've been around for decades. In fact, every country in the world has a leading edge that does some of this kind of stuff now. The companies I showed you, that list of companies, they're from all over the world. So in Mexico, there are probably dozens, maybe hundreds of companies that do something like this right now. And if you could just highlight those companies and get them to take a prominent role, they could show the other executives what they've been doing for the last decades or so and why it's good. And so the rest of the business world could learn from the companies that have been doing something like this, like the Mondragon. You know, I bet the Mondragon people would love to visit Mexico and to show you what they've been doing.
Do you really think it is, is it really profitable to be like this, to be conscious and thoughtful in terms of, profits per se? Is it worth it?
I think in principle it is. I don't think there's any doubt that it's going to be beneficial. But we have to get past our pessimism. If we can't find hope, then nothing changes. Pessimism is self-defeating. If you're pessimistic, then you don't do anything to change. You have to find hope if you want to change. And hope is to be found in what I just showed you, the social evolution of civilization, and the companies that have been doing this well, successfully. That's where hope is to be found. And we have to find hope, or else nothing's going to change.
Do you think we're running out of time? That the clock's ticking, I know, but are we running out of time in terms of actually changing the way the world's going?
Yeah, we are running out of time. The climate problem is getting just terrible. If something doesn't change, the southern half of the United States will be uninhabitable. Large portions of Mexico will be uninhabitable. The Middle East, Africa, disease will become more rampant because of the warmer temperatures. The weather will become more extreme. Fires, like Australia. Australia's suffering from fires like they've never seen before. California. We don't have much time. We have, I think, maybe, 2030. And it's good to see that some change is taking place. Some countries are taking climate change very seriously. And in this country, the Biden administration approved this law recently that's going to spend $300-something billion on climate change by helping encourage electric vehicles and that sort of thing. This is getting very serious. And if we don't change, we're not going to have a sustainable world. We could see major disasters.
Bill, are you optimistic that governments, will actually make the right decisions and, policies would be made right?
Yeah, somewhat, but I think the business world has to show the way, because the business is the most powerful institution in the world, more powerful than government. And they have the skills to do this. They could set the example. So Mexican business leaders have a great opportunity, I think, to reinvent their companies for the benefit of their companies and for the benefit of the nation, for Mexico and for the world as a whole. Other countries are going to start doing this, so it's really kind of a race between which country is going to do it first. The ones that do it first will lead, I think. It'll be a competitive advantage for a country that's able to solve its climate problems and its social problems and be more productive.
Bill, unfortunately, we just ran out of time in this conversation. Do you care to add something else to everything that you have already said?
Yeah, let me take a minute here and just sum up what I think I've said here. I think the data makes it clear that we're entering a new stage of social development, consciousness, beyond knowledge. We're living beyond knowledge now. That's what I want to impress upon you. It's happening right now. And the question and the problems are so severe that they're not going to be solved the same way we've been solving them before. We can't muddle through any longer. So if you could just accept those few basic facts, then I think we're in a position to understand what we have to do. We have to change the way we think. We need a global consciousness. And the best way to start doing that is by listening to one another. And especially for business people to start listening to their stakeholders. That in a nutshell, I think, is what we should be thinking about. Thank you for your attention, Gonzalo. You've been a big help. I hope this has been useful.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. I believe this was a great conversation. We still have many questions here. Is it okay with you? Maybe we can send them over to you via social media, and maybe we can start some sort of conversation with our audience. And yeah, well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, and I hope we see you again at our Expansión Summit 2023. Y a ustedes, a nuestra audiencia, muchísimas gracias por habernos acompañado en este primer día del Expansión Summit 2022. Los esperamos mañana en nuestra segunda jornada. Muchas gracias y buenas noches.